Is it time for us to be helping Ukraine to repel those Russian missiles, those drone missiles, in the way that we did for Israel in downing Iranian missiles? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 as usual. Let's talk first to Lesia Vasylenko, Ukrainian MP for the Holos Party and co-chair of the UK Friendship Group. And also with us is Elisabeth Braw, foreign policy expert and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Lesia, do you back these calls from the Foreign Affairs Minister for this kind of assistance by the wider Western community?
Just to be clear, from Ukraine's Foreign Affairs Ministry.
What did I say? Russian?
No, just Foreign Affairs Minister.
Apologies,
the British.
Ukrainian.
Yes, of course, I back these calls. We need not just the support, the political support, the moral support, which Ukraine has been getting, but we need the weapons on the ground. We need an air defense system, and we need ammunitions for those air defense systems. We need the fighter jets to be operating in the Ukrainian airspace. From day one of Russia's escalated aggression against Ukraine, we have been calling to close the Ukrainian skies. Close the skies, in other words, means give us the fighter jets, train our pilots, give us the ammunitions, give us the air defense systems, the Patriot systems, to be able to protect ourselves, our lands, our people, our homes. And as you see, Russian attacks, they continue. Russia's aggression against Ukraine is unprovoked. Unprovoked is the key word here. Whatever Ukraine does will always be seen by Russia as a provocation, but it's a subjective view of the situation by Vladimir Putin, his cronies, his regime. It's not objective.
So just to be clear for our listeners as well, because they'll be deciding what they would be happy to support or not, as UK citizens, as well as the material hardware support that's been given, and I know that some military support and training and the like has been given. You've listed there other kit, if you could call it that you would want. But are you looking for RAF jets to be protecting the skies, US jets, Polish jets, German jets to be protecting the skies?
We need those jets. The fact is that for Ukraine's security guarantees over the years, Ukraine has given up much of its military arsenal, including its own fighter jets. Back in the 2000s, our fighter jets were cut up into pieces in return for financial aid and in return for security guarantees. That's the case as it is. But those security guarantees were not supported by any of the countries who signed up to them, not by the US, not by the UK, not by any of the other countries. And Ukraine has found itself essentially in 2014 and then again in 2022, almost practically alone, fighting off Russia's aggression. And again, I come back to this thesis which is being circulated around that using the NATO countries' fighter jets to shoot down Russian missiles and Russian drones would be seen as a provocation. No, self-defense is not a provocation.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point to bring Elisabeth Braw into the conversation, foreign policy expert and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. With the Iranian example in mind, Elisabeth, that we saw at the weekend and when it's being hailed as a success and a necessary response to an unprecedented attack on Israel by a neighbouring state, are there different implications? Because logic would, you can see why a Ukrainian observer might say, well, by the same logic, you could help Ukraine in the same way. What are the different implications as you see it?
It is, as you say, Sheila, the case that now that Western countries have helped Israel defend itself against this Iranian attack, it's much harder to say, well, we won't do the same for Ukraine. And so even though at the moment it looks very unfair towards Ukraine that we, the West, have been refusing to help them in this way, actually, in a way, it could be almost, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish, but it could be good news for Ukraine because now it's much harder for Western leaders to make that argument anymore. And it's also much harder because Ukrainians will be able to say, well, look, you helped Israel, and that was it. Nothing much happened. You thwarted the attack, and you haven't paid any sort of price. So, as I said, I'm not trying to be overly optimistic about this, but it does help Ukraine and those who want Ukraine to receive more assistance. It does help the argument.
The Iranian example aside for a moment, what do you say the implications would be in European terms of a similar intervention for Ukraine, Elisabeth?
There is a big difference between Israel and Ukraine in that if we were to help Ukraine in this way, it would be against an adversary that is not far away, that is right in our midst. And I think that is really the root of Western hesitation when it comes to helping Ukraine. It's frankly, it's easier to do something like that in a region that is a bit more remote from our perspective.
Well, although isn't the reality that nowhere is far away in a fighter jet?
Nowhere is far away, but Russia still feels closer than the Middle East. So I think that is the basic hesitation has to do with the fact that Russia is right in our midst. Even though, as you say, fighter jets travel fast, drones travel fast, missiles travel fast if you want them to, even though the Iranian missiles travel pretty slowly. But it's just a geographical perception or geographical reality that gives it gives a perception of the danger to us in the West being much bigger if we were to help Ukraine against Russia.
Lesia Vasylenko, your thoughts on that different perception, because perception matters, doesn't it?
Well, perception matters for some countries. The Middle East, Iran is closer than Russia is. But then again, when we are all saying that we are committed to fighting for democracy, for seeing democracy flourish, and that we are standing up against autocratic regimes, then we as an international democratic community, as a democratic collective, need to stick by those words. Words have to turn into action. Otherwise, it's just empty promises, empty words, and they mean nothing. And it leads to questioning the very values of democracies and freedoms that so many politicians across the globe are so eager to bring up in their speeches. Now is the time to show what those values actually mean and how far you're willing to go to protect them. Because those values of freedom and democracy, they're actually directly linked to human lives.
And Elisabeth Braw, just a final thought. Given what's happened between Iran and Israel and the interventions that came not just from the UK, but from the US, from France, from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, I don't think I left anybody out. Is this question going to follow David Cameron and Rishi Sunak around now about Ukraine? Indeed, follow all those Western leaders around?
It will, because they acted so decisively and successfully in that case, in the case of Israel. And it does raise a question, what is the hesitation when it comes to Ukraine or indeed other countries that may face a similar attack?
Tony in Epping has texted to say Iran was a one-off attack. Well, so far, I hope. Assisting for one night is very different to helping every night for 2 years, or 2 years and counting. James in Barnes, hi.
Hi, Sheila, good afternoon. Sheila, I think it's a very simplistic and naive analogy to make, you shot down drones over Israel, why didn't you shoot down Russian drones? I think it's a ridiculous analogy or supposition to make. I think more pertinent is that the unspoken truth, and that's the problem the West have with Netanyahu, is shown that what happened the other night, that none of the West, quite rightly, in my eyes, and I'm Jewish, will allow Israel to be attacked and defeated by anybody. And that's what Netanyahu uses to his advantage, because...
But I ask you then, given the fine talk and the huge amounts of money and manpower as well, in some cases, that's gone into supporting Ukraine, why don't we take it that one step further and that bit more seriously, as we clearly would have done with Israel, and defend them. It's not about going into Russian airspace. That's different, but it's about covering Ukraine's airspace.
I think if we started to have Sheila, American jets, British jets, even in Ukrainian airspace, Russia would take that in a very dim view, and I think that the West would never attempt to do that, and because you're escalating something to potentially into World War III, and I think that's why the analogy is a ridiculous one to make.
Why do you think World War III only starts in Europe? It could start anywhere, couldn't it?
I think, sure, World War III could start with Israel launching a massive attack on Iran, and then Russia getting involved, and then you got World War III. So
we're already in. The reason I asked that question is the decision to defend Israel and Israel's skies was partly about that. It was partly about not wanting a great conflagration in the Middle East and protecting Israelis as well in the process. But it was also about wider global implications, wasn't it?
I think the West, they did it because if there was any massive damage to Israel, they knew what would happen. And I can.
What do you say would happen?
I think if the Iranian attack had caused enormous damage to any of the Israeli cities, I think Israel would have launched a full-scale attack on Iran, and that's what the West were worried about. And I think the irony to me is that the West allows Israel to demolish Gaza, Sheila, and yet the minute a drone is fired from Iran, they're there with their jets and their missiles to shoot them all down. It seems a bit of a one rule for the rich and one rule for the poor.
Well, you said there Israel would have bombed Iran, and I think you're probably right, had there been huge damage to Israeli towns and cities and people.
Yes.
I think you're right. But isn't the reality for Ukrainians, as evidenced today in that missile attack that I described at the beginning, Russia has already done that to Ukraine. It has already destroyed Ukrainian cities, twice over in some cases.
Yeah, no, I know. And I think that's the dichotomy, because they are not in NATO. The West doesn't want Russia to defeat Ukraine, and it's a war by proxy. And they're treading carefully. But I still maintain the whole war, and I despise President Trump immensely. But I do not believe that there would have been this war if he would have been president. I think he would have ensured and told Putin, which is what Gorbachev was told, Yeltsin was told, that Ukraine will not join NATO.
Yeah, but Israel isn't in NATO either.
No, I agree. No. That's exactly why.
So there are a lot. You can see why Ukraine is saying, "What's the difference?" And for you, the difference seems to be, given the help, this is where I don't quite get it. You might be right, and clearly different implications do prevail in different situations. But given the huge amounts of help that we're already giving Ukraine, what would the difference be if within Ukraine, we assisted them to keep their skies safe, as well as we're assisting them to keep some bits of their land safe?
Sheila,
what's the difference?
I think it's because simply the West is scared. They do not want Putin to think that we are. That there can't be any other reason.
Is it nuclear? Is it the nuclear thing?
100%. I think the West are terrified. 100%. There cannot be any other reason. That's the logic. That they are terrified.
Okay, interesting.